Child with autism? Autistic child? What's the right thing to say? Tune into this video and I'll help you parse it out. Hello, I am Rebecca Robbins, and I am the owner of Mindshaper SLP, and we help autistic individuals and their families create fruitful and fulfilling lives. And today I am going to be talking to you about the new language of autism. So, you might be noticing recently that there has been a change in the way that people are talking about autism, and terminologies are changing, and sometimes it feels like they're changing all the time, and like I can't say anything right, everything I say is wrong, it's not correct anymore. Well, don't worry, after today we'll have it all figured out for you. If you weren't aware, it's April, it's an autism acceptance month, and that is why I'm creating videos this month that are talking about the neurodiversity movement and the latest, most neurodiversity affirming trends in the autism field so that you can be the best ally to your autistic child or the autistic individuals in your life. So let's just dive right in and start with the difference between using identity first versus people first language. Now, if you're a professional listening, when you were in school, we were taught it is most respectful to use people first language. And the idea behind that was you put the person before the disability. So instead of saying autistic child, it was child with autism, right? And now, with the neurodiversity movement, there is a push to use identity first language. So you hear a lot more people using the term autistic child as opposed to child with autism. And I know for me, it took a little bit of a retraining of my brain to use identity first language, just because I was programmed that the most respectful way to refer to individuals with autism was to say individual with autism or child with autism. So, for the most part, I use identity first language, unless, of course, the grammar of my sentence, like the one I just said when speaking to about individuals with autism, it just makes more sense to use the person first language. And if you survey the autistic community, so individuals that are actually autistic, there's a mixed bag of responses as to whether they prefer identity first language or people first language. However, most autistic individuals prefer identity first language. So I have adopted, along with many other professionals, to use identity first language as well. And I want to just read to you a little excerpt from Lydia Brown's article called The Significance of Semantics: Person First Language, Why It Matters. And Lydia Brown has a website called autisticchoya.com, and it's AUTISTICHOYA.com. I'll put the link down below so you can check out this article. But she says when people say person with autism, it does have an attitudinal nuance. It suggests that the person can be separated from autism, which simply isn't true. It is impossible to separate a person from autism, just as it is impossible to separate a person from the color of his or her skin. So that's what she has to say about person first language. And now this is what she has to say about identity first language. When we say autistic person, we recognize, affirm, and validate an individual's identity as an autistic person. We recognize the value and worth of that individual as an autistic person. That being autistic is not a condition, absolutely irreconcilable with regarding people as inherently valuable and worth something. Oof. I'm just going to say that again. That being autistic is not a condition absolutely irreconcilable with regarding people as inherently valuable and worth something. Mic drop. We affirm the individual's potential to grow and mature, to overcome challenges and disability, and to live a meaningful life as an autistic. Ultimately, we are accepting that the individual is different from non-autistic people and that that's not a tragedy. That's not a tragedy, folks. And we are showing that we are not afraid or ashamed to recognize that difference. Again, that was Lydia Brown in her article, The Significance of Semantics, Person First Language, Why It Matters. So definitely go check that article out. And I love what she said about both types of language. And it hits me right at my heart. I mean, obviously, I'm reading it out loud and I had to stop and read things more than once because it's that impactful. So I'm hoping that that sheds a little bit of light as to why there's been a shift and where you're hearing more identity first language as opposed to person first language. And this article would be a great resource to use to educate, if you're a professional, to educate the other teachers that you work with, the administrators that you work with. If you are a parent, share it with your extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, to your friends who don't have any neurodivergent children. Um, it is really that is how we spread autism acceptance, is to share really well written resources like this from actually autistic people. And so that other people that may not be involved with an autistic person in their everyday life, they can see that autism is not a tragedy. We don't need to say person with autism so that that child is separated from their autism, because autism is not a dirty word. There's nothing wrong with being autistic. In fact, it's okay. It's celebrated. There's so many great things about being autistic. And the more that we spread that message, the less that there will be a stigma about a child being diagnosed with autism. So that's the first new language of autism that I wanted to address today. The next is functioning descriptions. And I still hear a lot of people using functioning labels. And what do I mean by that? I mean high functioning versus low functioning. And maybe you have heard, if you're a professional or other parents, they say, oh, yeah, my child has autism, but he's high functioning. And it's like they use that as like, oh, but it's okay that he has autism because he's high functioning, you know? Um, you hear that a lot. And there is a problem with using these functioning labels. And I would like to encourage you to steer away from using them and to reshape your language to speak about what you're trying to say in a different way. Before I give you the alternative of how you can talk about, instead of using functioning descriptions, what you should say instead, let's talk about what the problems are. So first, if someone is quote unquote high functioning and we're labeling that person as high functioning, the problem with that is it 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 can potentially prevent that person from getting the resources and supports that they need, because they're presumed to be high functioning, so there's almost like an expectation that they can function without any supports. And if they do need supports or support or help, then it's frowned upon or they're looked at in a negative light because they have been deemed high functioning. And so it can prevent them from getting the help and support that they need. On the other end of the spectrum, when someone is deemed low functioning, the people around them are presuming incompetence, and that person may not be given opportunities to fulfill their full potential. And the people or the adults in their environment might not ever expect more from that person because they're deemed low functioning, even if that person might be capable of so much more than they're being exposed to or they're being assumed that they are capable of. And I want to talk to you about something called the Rosenthal effect. And it can also be known as the Pygmalion effect. So Robert Rosenthal is a scientist, and he did an experiment first with rats. So the first experiment with rats was he put two groups of rats, and on one group of rats he said that they were smart rats. I don't remember exactly like the terminology, but he put a little label on that group of rats that they're smart, they're really intelligent, and then the other group of rats was deemed unintelligent. And the group of rats, even though there was no intelligent difference between these rats, they were exactly the same rats. There was no intelligent difference. The only difference is that one was labeled intelligent and the others were labeled not intelligent. But the intelligent rats performed better than the non-intelligent rats because the experimenters that came in to work with those rats presumed competence for the intelligent rats, and they did not presume competence with the non-intelligent rats. And so with this experiment, the results of this experiment, Rosenthal then took this into an educational environment. And he looked at what would happen in a classroom if a teacher was told that these children are expected to perform well and these children are not expected to perform well. Well, you guessed it, when we do that, the children that have been deemed these are good students, these are highly intelligent students, they're going to do well in class, they did better than the ones that didn't, because even, and I believe that the class was controlled in terms of their cognitive abilities, so they should have been able to perform the same, basically. But the only difference was the presumed competence level or the presumed intelligence level. And when we presume that a group of students or a person has a certain capability, they will fulfill that capability. They will perform better. When we presume that someone does not have a certain set of skills or a certain capability, they don't perform as well. And part of that is because we don't expect them to, and so that individual is given tasks that aren't as challenging. That individual is, if they can't do it, that's okay. You don't have to do it. Whereas the individual that we have the expectation that they can, we push them to a higher standard. We help them work through their challenges and struggles. Whereas we might just, if there's a challenge or struggle with the child that doesn't have that presumed competence, we just kind of let it go and we don't help them push through those challenges and struggles. So that Rosenthal effect or that Pygmalion effect, definitely look it up. There's lots of YouTube videos on it. That is what can happen with these high and low functioning labels, unfortunately. So if we are labeling a child as low functioning, then the expectations that other people are going to have from that child are going to be much lower than what that child is potentially very capable of. So it's very important that we are careful with our language, especially with these functioning labels. So what can you do instead? We can comment on support needs rather than functioning labels. And what's great about commenting on support needs is support needs are highly dependent on the environment the child's in, the skill that's being worked on, the context in which the child is performing, which means that a child that might have higher support needs in one situation might have little or no support needs in another situation. So now we're not just defining that child as low functioning or high functioning across the board in all circumstances. We're really looking at the level of support that that child needs in each and every situation and each and every context in each and every environment. So it enables much better opportunities for growth. It's much more inclusive, and it's much more neurodiversity affirming, because the chances are that that individual is going to get the supports they need to fulfill their full potential. So the last and final new language of autism that I want to cover today is the difference between non-speaking instead of nonverbal. So we use the term nonverbal for children that historically we've used that term nonverbal for children that aren't able to produce speech. And I've even heard people say this about children that can talk, but they have very little functional speech, that they're mostly using their speech for maybe self-stimulatory purposes. Maybe they have a few requests that they're able to make, but for the most part, they're not using their speech or their language to functionally communicate or to navigate their environment. And so you hear the term nonverbal being used for that child, but usually it's for an individual that is not able to produce speech, verbal speech, mouth words. So instead, what's more neurodiversity affirming is to use the term non speaking. Non-speaking is a term that indicates a person is unable to use their mouth words or their verbal speech, their actual speech production, but it does not presume that they don't have language or that they're not able to communicate in another form or with other methods. Whereas the term nonverbal more so gives the impression that the individual is void of communication or void of language abilities at all, which could unfortunately lead to restricted access to communication devices, to other alternative communication strategies, because again, it's creating that expectation in the brain that the child is not non communicative almost. And so, non speaking is a much more neurodiversity affirming way to refer to a child that it doesn't has not yet develop the ability to produce speech and to communicate via speech as opposed to nonverbal. And so that one too, remember last week's video when I talked about why do I feel triggered by the neurodiversity movement? I nonverbal, I created a program that was geared towards teaching parents how to use my system of hand cues to promote speech production, and I called it Nonverbal No More, and it was before I really learned about the neurodiversity movement and learned about this new language of autism. And so, yeah, it was insert open mouth, insert foot sort of situation. I ate my humble pie, and I've since pulled that product down. I'm going to rebrand it, rename it, all of that kind of stuff so that it is more neurodiversity affirming. But these we need to allow ourselves to have these moments where we just have some growing pains and we learn from our mistakes and we do better and we move on. So if you're using these terms, please don't beat yourself up. It is the terms that we have been using traditionally in the field for a very long time. And sometimes these changes seem to happen overnight. And all of a sudden you're saying something and nope, can't say that anymore. And you don't even understand why. So that's why I wanted to create this video talking about the new language of autism. So you knew exactly not only what the more neurodiversity affirming terms are, but the reason why behind it. So, because I find that when you can understand the reason why what you were used to saying isn't acceptable anymore and this new term is preferred, I think it's easier to swallow the humble pie like I had to do and have that growth mindset that we all need to do better for our children so that you can start using the new terms with integrity and without feeling like you have to beat yourself up or embarrassed that you used to use these other terms that are no longer considered neurodiversity affirming. So I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this and what was your biggest takeaway from today's video? What did you learn from today that you didn't before? And what and how are you going to start spreading the word on the using the new language of autism in your world? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and like this video and share it with all of your friends. All right, bye.